Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Kat Garbus. I'm part of the Jamf team, and with me today is Dan Lawrence of Stanley Black & Decker.
Good morning, Jamf Nation.
We are here today for a wonderful Q&A session, and this is going to be an overview of pretty much what we'll be discussing today. We're going to do some intros. We're going to talk about Dan's Windows background, how he introduced Apple into his environment, and then, of course, leveraging Jamf. But before we do that, for those of you who we have not had the pleasure yet of working with, we're Jamf. We are here to help IT admins. You are all the superheroes that are managing all the complexity out there. And our goal at the end of the day is to really help make your jobs easier. So when it comes to Apple devices and having it fit in your larger infrastructure, we focus very much only on Apple. And at the same time, that's expanded through our other suites. But when we think of Apple Enterprise Management as a platform, we are hyper focused on Apple devices. And that started with management and that expanded through identity management along with endpoint management protection. So we are here today because we understand that there are just so many areas of support within the IT infrastructure, and the Apple platform is a piece of that. So Dan has basically taken to task and has leveraged the entire Jamf platform to help support his Apple infrastructure within his larger IT infrastructure. So we're going to spend some time today getting to know Dan. Um, and we are very excited to have him here. So Dan is our self-proclaimed PC tech guy. So Dan, welcome.
Thanks, Kat.
And before we start diving into the details, I would love to learn a bit more about who you are. And really, if you can tell our listeners a bit more about your tech background, where did it all start?
Sure. So, near the end of my Marine Corps career, I bought a computer from another Marine who was traveling back into the middle of the country with very little care of needing a computer. And, you know, 30 years ago, a computer cost me $1,200 secondhand. And that was quite a bit. I had just gotten off a deployment, so I had a little bit of extra cash burning in my pocket. So I thought it was a good investment. 2 weeks after he left, my computer hit the bricks. It was just not working. So, still with that money in my pocket, I packaged it all up and drove out to CompUSA, and they said sure they could fix it. Cost another $600 though. Well, I wasn't having any of that. That was just too much money at this point to invest in this box of electronics. So I bought a book and read it front to back, figured out what was going on, ended up buying a system board, uh, got all the dip switches set correctly, and that was the start of my computer career. Got out of the Marine Corps and started working on a contracting basis for one of the local banks here in Northern Ohio called National City. And this was the uh, middle of 1998, and Y2K had started rearing its head. And I ended up having a job going from branch to branch, state to state, location to location, bringing all the computers and terminals up to our Y2K standards. Once that was done, my next contract took me to HP, where I learned how to work on printers, plotters, and of course the servers and blade servers. At that point, it was when my knowledge expanded through that, and it was just a lot of information that I had. Once that contract had ended, not well, obviously, I ended up getting a job back at National City Bank as a full time employee. From there, I started working in the branches, computer work, working on the things that I had done for the Y2K project, but more troubleshoot, break fix type of stuff. Projects as well. And from there, my National City career went from the branch environment to the corporate environment and through a TPM role. When I left, I had run about a 46,000 machine PC refresh program for our entire footprint. I left National City when PNC came in and bought it out and started working for a law firm as a senior technical lead here in Northern Ohio. Uh, I was then promoted within that law firm and started doing some troubleshooting and some high end troubleshooting for the other sites that we had across the country. I left Baker and came to MTD, and this was a great career move for me. The location was a lot better, and the people seemed a whole lot more friendlier in at MTD. And at that point, it was 2 months later when sitting in a staff meeting, my boss said, "Hey, who wants to handle all the Apple devices that we have been coming into the footprint?"
And
And
that's a
at that
really good
point, there was just
segue,
dead
actually.
silence.
That's a really good segue into our next question. How did you end up with Apple? But I have to just comment, just the whole project planning on Y2K Comp USA. I feel like I time traveled a little bit back into the 90s, and I just remember having to take a bunch of floppy disks because I had to back up all the computers for my family. No surprise, I was a computer nerd, and I just remember that. So thank you for that little walk down memory lane, Dan. So
You get the music.
you have all this experience that you've been self-taught. You um, have just experience with looks like legal, manufacturing, finance tech, and a lot of it was with your PC journey. So sounds like you were kind of dovetailing into that. How did you end up with the Apple tech and supporting all the Apple devices with this PC background?
Yeah, so it really wasn't a pretty story. It was a matter of nobody chirping up and being the new guy. My boss was like, "Hey, you get to do this no matter what." And my Apple experience at the time was nothing more than working on iPhones and iPads. So I took on the responsibilities, and I got myself a Mac, figured out how to turn it on, figured out how to turn it off, looking through the settings, and I really just walked myself through working on a Mac. How they worked was different than what the PC environment had been and what I had been into the last 20 years of my life. So it was just trying to figure it out. How do I get this to work? And that was it.
That's great. And why did your organization adopt Apple devices? It seems like they just kind of fell out of the sky. How did the new guy end up working with the Apple devices when they didn't have anyone that supported Apple?
So that was the problem, and that was why my boss wanted to get to bring the Macs into some kind of policy. They were just out there. People had the ability to buy a Mac, and it was all dependent on the site they were as far as how they were going to work. Some of the site support techs had no experience, like me, on how to work a Mac and how to get it to work, and delved into it full boat, or just patched it together. Um, it was really more of a security reasoning to get these Macs under control and into our security policies, into our patching policies, and getting them into some sort of control so they could work. I mean, there was no doubt that the Macs had a business justification to be there, but we needed them to be properly secure so they weren't going to cause any kind of interference or nuisance.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's actually really common in the enterprise. A lot of organizations are saying, hey, if you want to use Apple, you can. But then it's also basically mirroring what we've got going on the Windows side, since that's been really the backbone for a lot of enterprise organizations, and making sure that you can add those Apple devices into compliance, which I think will take us right to our next question. What led you to work with Jamf? And following that, most people say, hey, we already have an MDM tool, that's cross platform that will work for both. Why not just use that? So, as you were starting to learn Apple and as you were starting to get them under compliance, what got you working with us?
So I took my I took myself into a deep dive and looked at everything that was possible. Could we just do it with binding the Macs into our Active Directory? But everything really kind of just flowed right back to Jamf. The training that was out there, the knowledge based articles that were out there, and of course Jamf Nation. I mean that was really the greatest resource of all. I could ask questions, stupid questions, smart questions, any questions, and even just kind of fun questions. And the community was right there to get back to you. I mean, they provided a lot of information, and actually they provided a lot of, pointing out where I could get more information on Jamf too. And so it was at that point we just decided, we've got Intune controlling our Windows operating systems, also running with the iPhones and iPads. But the Macs needed, we believed and still believe, that they needed its own source. So we decided to pull the trigger and go with Jamf. And it just made sense then to keep them separate. There's a lot of, I won't say hate, but a lot of discourse between Mac users and PC users. And as you travel up the chain into the engineers, uh, you see a lot of that too. So it kind of made sense just to keep both the Microsoft engineers on one page and the Jamf engineers and Mac engineers off in their own little world.
I also came from a Windows background too. So I think for me, it's the understanding that each operating system has its own uniqueness to it. Can you accomplish the same things? Totally. But I think how you get there and that journey to accomplishing maybe those tasks are always just slightly varied. So I guess, from what it sounds like, you were tasked with all this, and it sounds like all roads led to Jamf, which I'm okay with. A little biased over here. But what then got you started with Jamf Pro, and then what also led you to adopt Jamf Connect and Protect? What we tend to see is people start to realize the gaps, and okay, one MDM doing it all really is leaving some gaps in granularity. So we're going to use Jamf Pro, but then adopting Connect and Protect. I would love to hear a little bit about that journey.
So let me start off by saying this. The biggest regret I have with going with Jamf was to not grab everything all at once. Jamf Pro was great. It was the jump start that we had was phenomenal. It got us into our securities, our policies, everything was right there. But at the same time, we should have taken the further leap and going to connect and protect as well. And I'll get into that in a minute. But Jamf Pro really was everything that we needed. We were able to create our packages. We were able to create our security policies. We were able to integrate through LDAP, so we didn't have to bind our Macs into Active Directory. And with that alone, that brought us into Jamf Connect. Everybody has password issues, but the Jamf Protect, that was the big one, I think. And in today's day, with all of the security issues that the Microsoft platforms are seeing, Macs are seeing them now too. I mean, we're getting the occasional, CVEs coming out where we need to upgrade to the latest Mac OS release. Ours ours came several months later when Silver Sparrow hit, and Silver Sparrow kind of hit everybody really hard. I got a call from my boss. Hey, are we protected with our Macs and with Silver Sparrow? And we had just purchased the Protect package several months before, and so we had integrated it through our Jamf Pro. Our policies were already in place. I asked my boss to give me 5 minutes, and I could let him know. And I was able to log into our Protect console, see the all clear, and get back to him. And he was very surprised at the speed with it. With the Mac, with the Mac platform, and with the Protect, it was all right hand. I mean, it took me longer to get logged in than really to see what our protection was. With the Windows, I mean, the printer issue that hit last year is still going on. They're still having fights with us. It was a matter of moments for us really to say, hey, we've got that all clear right now. We've got that protection. It's it came out, and it was just a solid understanding of having that ability, which executive leadership saw, and they were like, well, that right there was the best investment that we've ever made for our Macs. So it all really worked out well.
I'm really glad to hear that. And I love the example you gave with Silver Sparrow malware, because that is something that everyone's panicked when there's a new threat that's out there that's kind of unknown. And it's great to know that our software was able to help you not only remain compliant, know if you were hit or not, but then you were able to do it within minutes. Oftentimes, there's a little more legwork that's needed to be done. So I really, really appreciate that example, and I'm really glad that you were able to quickly identify what the situation was and if you needed to act or not. And it sounded like, hey, we're in the clear. I did want to hone in on something you had mentioned with uh, users getting locked out of their machines. And that usually points to Jamf Connect. And I wanted to ask about that because binding Macs, that's often well, I'll backtrack. Binding Windows devices is a common way to secure the Windows from an identity standpoint. And a lot of times people will try to copy paste that method onto the Mac. So I was curious, how often were your users getting locked out of their machines? Can you share what that looked like, where Jamf Connect helped?
Well, we had it happen one time with a fairly large deadline that was coming up in one of our marketing department heads, and thankfully we had a back door that we were able to squeeze by. I mean, at the time we weren't all sent home. I mean, this was pre-COVID, uh, but it was nice to have the ability to have a back door, so to speak, in order to get that password unlocked for the user. And that really took us into the good reasoning of why we needed to invest in Jamf Connect and get it integrated with LDAP. So we do bring in Intune and Company Portal onto our systems so we can have that protection, and we don't have to worry about getting a user locked out. We get the notifications. We're able to change the password. We're able to unlock the users as we could, as we can with the Windows side, just as well as and as easy as we can on a Mac side.
I think that's key. And one of the features I know that comes to mind that I wish I had before we had Jamf Connect, the password sync and verify, I think really is a standout feature. I wish we had that. I remember our help desk team prior to me joining Jamf would spend hours, sometimes even days, trying to unlock a user. And it's just so frustrating for that end user to, you know, be kind of locked with, hey, I'm trying to meet a marketing deadline or a design deadline, and I'm locked out of my machine and I can't do anything. So I'm really glad you had a way around it, but I'm also glad instead of being like, okay, where you need to fix this, instead of let's just keep trying to have this back end. It's kind of like putting a band-aid when you really need stitches. I'm glad you opted to go for the stitches route instead of just putting a band-aid or more band-aids on the situation.
Right. And with having Jamf Connect, I mean, it really equals out the playing field between the Windows users and the Mac users. I mean, we don't have to have two different sets of rules for certain people that are running Macs and how they have to change their password and what they have to do, and a Windows user doing the same thing. We can send out one email to all users, and it's the same email on how when they need to change their password, how they need to change their password, and it's all the same for everybody.
Yeah, the heart of it is identity security. And especially now that so many organizations are in a hybrid environment where some people are within the four walls of the organization, sometimes they're remote, or more often now they're remote. I understand how key that is. So I want to thank you for sharing that. And this is pretty much one of the challenges. Are there any other challenges that you were facing with either the Apple integration within the network or anything that you overcame that you would like to share?
Yeah, so probably one of the greatest the biggest accomplishments that I've had with Jamf and with Apple and with the Macs was combining them all together. Uh, some of our engineers require a certain program that will only run on the Windows side of the systems. So we use parallels to create a VDK in order to let them remote onto a virtual desktop, run that technology, and go through. When Apple brought out its silicon-based M1 chips, it kind of threw us a curveball. We had to rededicate some resources and build a new image with the ARM-based image in order to get um, the systems to run on our Mac devices. And once that happened, Parallels upgraded their system and then only put out, Windows 11. And we've really been running hard on this, and it probably took several months, maybe even more than several months, more than I'd like to admit for this part. But it took me a while to get a fully functioning domain authenticated Windows based VDK running on our Macs with ease. And it took a lot of time, and it took a lot of hard work, it took a lot of communication from me going into some of the Microsoft engineers, into our imaging engineers, and trying to find out where that disconnect was and how we could get it to work in between the VDKs, the ARM-based system. And it took months, probably close to 6 months of working with a dozen different people getting that system to work. Um, I was very pleased when I could go to my boss and say, "Hey, we now have that ability, and it's nothing more than signing onto the Mac, getting the Parallels license, and creating the VDK. The user can log in now, and they have their Mac system, and now they can just with a swipe of their fingers go into their Windows 11 system and work what they need to do when they need to do it without having a second computer or a second system. They have one system working just as much as they need to, and they can fulfill both their functions on the Mac and on the Windows side."
I'm really glad for you to have overcome this and found a solution. And I think it really paints a picture that's quite relatable to probably several of our listeners. And I really want to thank you for sharing that. There's always so much as technology grows and advances, ambiguity around it. And, we either have the option to do nothing or to do something about it. And chances are, if you do nothing, you're going to be behind year after year after year. So, really glad that it worked out for you in the long run. I just kept thinking in my mind, it sounds like a marathon. Like you had all these different miles to get through, but once you got to the end and you could go to your boss, it's always just that sigh of relief, and you accomplished it despite it being probably a very challenging race to overcome. I
The
did want to.
marathon's probably not the greatest example. I'm no longer a runner anymore, so I'm a big guy. I used to run my 3 miles, my 5 miles way back in the day, but yeah, let's stay away from that running metaphor if you don't
I'll
mind.
I'll run for you. I'll run for you.
Okay, you do the
I'm
running.
not a great
You do the
runner, but
running.
I do try to run. Speaking of, so we touched a bit on pro, we touched a bit on identity. I want to talk a bit about endpoint security because especially with all the changes, organizations as a whole, whether you're a IT admin, you're a network admin, you're in security operations, that endpoint security is probably very top of mind for everybody within the organization. And when Apple devices are being fit into the overall infrastructure, chances are Microsoft solutions or other Windows first solutions are in place. You made the decision ultimately to adopt Jamf Protect. We're so curious about that. Any differences that you perhaps noticed in Jamf Protect versus a Windows first security tool, and anything surprise you along the way?
I really think that Jamf is a step ahead of everybody else because, knock on wood, we haven't had any threats or issues within our environment. So knock on whatever you can. That's been great.
I
It
just knocked on my
feels like
wooden desk for you.
I'll knock on mine
Yeah.
too.
Okay, good.
But it's really been great. I've felt that Jamf has been the leader in preventing those. I mean, the warnings come out. Everybody sees the threats that are issued, and anytime you go check, it's like Jamf has already found that vulnerability, patched that vulnerability, and it's already spread out to our endpoints. And it's, it goes back to one of my earlier comments about taking that leap forward and getting the protect package and the connect package when you get the Jamf Pro. It's just all integrated, and everything just seems so fluid with each other. It's just like the Apple devices themselves. You have an iPhone, you have a Mac, you have an iPad, and you don't have to worry about going to do something different on one device to the next because they're all the same. They all work tremendously with each other, just as the Jamf packages themselves, the Pro, the Connect, the Protect, they all work seamlessly together. And it's so fluid and so soothing that you don't have to worry about little differences with each of the different packages. They all work together great.
I think that's really helpful too if there ever is an issue, or to your point when you're even just to simply check for auditing, should you need to remediate everything, they're all talking to each other. They're all um, they're all making sure that they can speak to each other. And I think that's really key, because especially if you do have an issue at hand, you want to make sure that it's seamless, and you want to make sure that everything can be streamlined from remediation to, okay, oh, this doesn't talk to this, I got to go fix this now, or I got to, do a bit more manual work that's needed. So I really want to thank you for that. And I guess before we wrap up, any final thoughts or any advice you'd like to give to anyone listening to this session?
Yeah, I said it before. I'll say it again. Jamf is a great package, and package is the key word there. They offer so many different solutions: Jamf Pro, Jamf Protect, Jamf Connect. My biggest regret is that we didn't jump in full fledged and grab all three packages at the same time. Greatest movie, one of my favorite movies, Deadpool. One of the statements in there is all the little curvy jigsaw pieces, they all fit together smoothly. That's what Jamf does with the Pro, the Connect, and the Protect. Just like Apple, everything fits together seamlessly. It's the way to go. If you haven't made a decision, if you're waiting on whatever, just understand that those three packages work together without flaw. Seamless, smooth, fluid. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dan. Thank you so much. And by the way, I love Deadpool. I really love that somehow we were able to fit the Marvel universe into our JNUC sessions. So thank you for that. And
I'm
I
glad I
really
could
want to
help.
thank
Great
you.
series.
Yes, I've never had a Marvel in a JNUC presentation before, so I really appreciate you helping make that come true. Dan, thank you so much for joining us here today, sharing your experience. And I think the key thing here that it reminds me of one of my favorite Disney movies, Ratatouille, where they say anyone can cook. And I love that you had such a strong PC background, and just kind of the vibe I get is anyone can do Apple. And you are proof of that. You are proof that you have that PC knowledge, and that was what you knew. And you were designated, okay, new guy, here's Apple. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that experience and your knowledge and your lessons learned along the way. And listeners, thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your JNUC. Until next time, thank you so much.
Bye bye, everybody.